Welcome to 2022 and my guest, Yonason Goldson. I am so delighted to kick off the new year with this wonderful guest. For those who don't know me, I'm Jayne Latz, the communication trainer, and my goal is to work with business professionals just like you to accelerate your career success, your company, your brand by improving your communication skills. And what brings us here today? We are going to discuss how to captivate and connect through ethical communication. We will help you to discover why curiosity, clarity, and courage are the keys to success. We will help you learn why personal integrity is essential to successful communication and to recognize how labels sabotage our ability to communicate and connect. And I have so much more to say on all of that, but today it's about Yonason. So, who is Yonason? Yonason Goldson is the director of Ethical Imperatives, where he works with professionals to create a culture of ethics that builds trust, sparks initiative, and drives productivity. He's a keynote speaker and a TEDx speaker, a trainer, a coach, and a community rabbi, as well as a podcast host, columnist, author, repentant hitchhiker, world traveler, and retired high school teacher in St. Louis. Can you imagine that he found time to join me here today on my LinkedIn channel? He's published hundreds of articles applying ancient rabbinic wisdom to the challenges of the modern secular world, and 6 books, with the most recent being Grappling with the Gray, an ethical handbook for personal success and business prosperity. When we are done, if you want to learn more, you can visit him at YonasonGoldson.com. So let's kick off today with our first question. And Yonason, would you like me to call you Yonason, Rabbi Goldson, man of a million talents? How should I refer to you?
Well, I always go back to what my father said, Jane. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Fair enough. So on the surface, ethics and communication don't really seem to have any connection at all. Why isn't that the case?
Well, that I think is a critical question, and thank you for inviting me on to discuss it. And that's part of the title of my TED Talk, The Art of Ethical Communication. And it's, if you look at how we consume most of our news these days, we go to the channels that we trust. Very often we trust them because they're telling us what we want to hear. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And we'll get into that more into that later. But it's that element of trust. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to believe anything you tell me. And I'm not even going to want to listen to you in the first place. So the only way that we can effectively communicate is if we earn the trust of the listener. It's that credibility that is the first step towards what I call ethical communication. Without the credibility, the message is lost. So that's the foundation of all communication and success in communication that's going to come later.
And I can't help but say, isn't that the premise of LinkedIn? That when we connect with somebody before we even want to do business with each other, it's really about building that trust through insightful communication.
Yeah, and it's a really important point because we're communicating before we open our mouths. We're communicating through our pictures. How do I present myself? The clothes I wear, the
Exactly.
description of who I am, my background, the monikers that I use to identify. I mean, this is all part of communication. And what we're trying to do on LinkedIn and really in any kind of advertising or marketing, we're trying to show our best selves in a way that is authentic. You know, authenticity is such a cliche and a buzzword now, and I often say it's disturbing when we find ourselves in a place where authenticity is a cliche. But what does it mean? It means I'm not putting on an act.
Hmm.
I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not, because if I am, it's going to come out sooner or later.
Exactly. It makes me think about social media. Whenever I look at some of the influencers, especially let's call it on Instagram for a moment, which is not necessarily my ideal target market, but I look at them being kind of fun and frivolous and cheeky wherever they are, and that's not me, right or wrong. So I'm certainly not building, huge amounts of followers on Instagram, but in the more professional places like LinkedIn and YouTube, I am, because that's where I can communicate, who I really am. So I agree with you. It's again that authenticity. It's who I am and where are the people that would relate to that person, who I am.
And that's a pretty interesting idea because, on the one hand, you want to seek out the audience with whom you're going to resonate because they're the ones who are going to be most receptive to your message. I also, Instagram just doesn't seem to be my place. I post a video there, I get maybe 10 or 15 views. I post on LinkedIn, I'll typically get hundreds. And at someone's suggestion, I started posting on TikTok. And I had one video that has 135,000 views so far. And what's wonderful about TikTok, whatever your complaints about it might be, it's designed to help you reach people that are not already in your network.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And that is, whether we use the platform or not, that's something that we really want to do. Is we want to communicate in a way that people share it because it's so compelling. The message is so compelling, and then we can reach beyond those because it's easy to preach to the choir, but that's not really communication either, because I'm just telling people what they already know, what they already want to hear. I want to get that message out further. I want to engage people who may not be thinking quite like me already, so that we can go deeper and understand better.
I am laughing, Jonathan, because you just met my chief digital marketing officer. And recently, he and I have just had this conversation about TikTok because I was doing a presentation a few weeks ago at a very professional company in person. And they said, "Are you on TikTok?" And I said, "No." And they said, "You should be." And it was a medical company, a company I and it was a leadership team. And in unison, the entire team said, "You should be on TikTok." And when I told Joel, who you just met, kind of my guru to technology and video and YouTube, the two of us were like, "Is that really the right platform?" And you're now telling me this. I'm 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 in shock. I think that we do have to explore TikTok in 2022. Amazing feedback, Giannis, and thank
Well,
you.
I had the same reaction. A connection reached out and said, "You really need to go on TikTok." I said, "Why do I need another platform?"
Exactly, exactly. Wow. All right, so moving on, can you offer a simple working definition of probably your favorite topic, ethics? And what
Absolutely.
happens if we don't agree on what is ethical?
Well, that can actually be a good thing sometimes, but we'll get to that. The definition that I've developed for ethics, it's a discipline of recognizing and taking responsibility for the impact our actions have on others. And that's nuanced because what we do in private is also um, part of ethics. But we'll save that discussion for another time. Especially in America, we are so focused on our rights, and rights are important. The whole foundation of the country is rights. But what really are rights? Rights are the responsibility that a society has to every individual. So if we would focus more on our responsibilities and less on our own rights, in other words, I take responsibility for your rights, you take responsibility for my rights, and now we are always going to be in harmony. Whereas if I'm standing on my rights and you're standing on your rights, we're going to be bumping into each other all the time. And the reason I titled my book Grappling with the Gray is because when things are black and white, they're relatively simple. But so much of life is in that murky gray area where it's not about right versus wrong. It's right versus right or wrong versus wrong. It's setting priorities. And that's complicated. It's messy. I like to say there's no app for being ethical. You can't just punch the variables into your phone and hit enter. It doesn't work that way because situations change. The ethical principles are the same, but the application of them changes. Different people, different situations, different times, different places. And so inevitably we are going to disagree. And that's okay because that gives us room to hash out what are our priorities? What are the common values? How can we find a way of discovering common ground, working together, principled compromise? It's what Stephen Carter calls constructive disagreement. It's a good thing when we're not all in lockstep.
Right.
Because that's how we get closer to the truth. So if we develop the same fundamental principles of ethics, then we're going to apply them in slightly different ways. But if we can do it respectfully and thoughtfully, and we can engage one another in civil discourse, that those differences actually become a source of strength and success.
I love that term, principled compromise. It's and also that concept of gray. You know, so much in our world is that gray. That's such a great title, The Grappling with the Gray. I think about right now. I have an attorney updating a agreement for me, and it's always the gray, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have those agreements just be such concrete sentences, but they're not. The gray is where we get into so much trouble. Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I love that principled compromise. That's amazing. So how did becoming a rabbi prepare you for engaging the professional world? It seems like those are two parallel worlds, but I am sure you have a lot to say on how they intertwine and overlap.
Indeed. And the story really begins long before I had the faintest idea that I would or might ever become a rabbi. It's a story that I tell in my TED Talk. That after I finished college with a degree in English, I set off hitchhiking cross country. And what I discovered in my hitchhiking is that many people, when they pick up a passenger, they pick up a hitchhiker, what they really want is someone to listen. It's the strangers on a train principle. And I had people tell me more than once, I'm telling you things I've never told my wife or my kids or my best friend because it's safe. They know they're never going to see me again. And in that context, I realized it's not about me. As Stephen Covey says, most of us don't talk with the intent to understand. We talk with the intent to reply. So while you're talking to me, I'm not really listening to you. I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as you stop to breathe, I can jump in. And my psychology professor called these dialogues of the deaf. Sometimes it can be quite entertaining if you're eavesdropping on a conversation, but it's not communication. They're just alternating monologues. And what I realized is that the way I paid for my ride was by being a good listener. And that prepared me for when in my travels, led me across the country, led me across Europe. I ended up in Israel, and through a series of unlikely events, I ended up in a rabbinic college, literally trapped in a room with a Hasidic rabbi who I never would have listened to had there been a way out. It was such a crowded room. I was in the back corner, and I would have made a spectacle of myself climbing over all the people to get out. And as soon as he started talking, wow, this guy sounds like a college professor. Well, I later found out he was. But it was his ability to articulate ideas that challenged me in a way that I recognized their wisdom and wanted to engage. And that's really what Jewish study, Torah study is all about. We had 2,000 years ago 2 great academies. And history records that when they argued in the study hall, they were so passionate, it was as if they fought with swords and spears. But when they left the study hall, they left it behind. They were friends. It never became personal. And it was that sharpness. King Solomon says, iron sharpens iron, and one person, the mind of another. It's when we engage in these sharp exchanges, principled, civil, respectful, but passionate, then we sharpen our thinking skills. And we see subjects and topics from different angles. And we don't get stuck in our own way of looking at things. And so the ability to generate this phrase, safe space, it shouldn't mean I'm safe from ideas that challenge me. It should mean I'm safe to explore new ideas and entertain them and consider them, because that's how we get to a deeper understanding of the truth.
Our paths are so interestingly similar. I always quote when I do a lot of my presentations that as a speech pathologist, when I first entered undergraduate, like in one of my very first courses, they talked about communication being a two-way street. There's a speaker and there's a receiver. And unfortunately, as you were saying, so many people do the speaking and they forget about listening. And when I talk about how to connect with your listener, one of the most important points is to be an active listener. And I use as an example when I introduce myself. When I introduce myself as a communication change agent, sometimes there's a blank look. Like people just don't know what a communication trainer does. Other times, someone will follow up with a very thoughtful question about what it is I do. And I am immediately wanting to communicate more with that individual because, as you were saying, they were not listening to just respond back about them. They were listening to honestly connect. And it's so obvious when someone is an active listener and a good communicator. So
of course, Dale Carnegie, who was, the icon of this whole area, he tells these stories about how he gained a reputation as a sparkling speaker by just asking questions that encourage people to talk about themselves. Because, the truth is, for most of us, we are our own favorite thing to talk about.
Right.
And when we give others the chance to talk about themselves, we can learn who they are, what they believe, what they think. Sometimes we're going to discover new ideas. Sometimes we're going to even have reason to reconsider our own ideas. And that's a good thing. Because do I want to keep being wrong? Or do I want to discover that I'm wrong or that I have to readjust? It's okay.
Right.
We should be growing. We should be learning. And of course, that's part of the curiosity component that we started off, the 3 C's. The first is to want to learn about things I don't already know, to want to learn about people, to want to hear what they have to say. That curiosity is the first step towards ethical communication.
I love that. Love that. You're so right. And I think that if our listeners today can walk away with one takeaway, one practice assignment, is to be that active listener. And today, find a person that you're going to have a conversation with. And for the first time, maybe truly listen to what they're saying and be sure to follow up with an insightful question and let us know how that felt and how that impacted the communication that you were having. I love that as an assignment. But I do have one more question for you. What are the qualities that define an ethical leader, and how will they influence company culture?
Well, that's a lot to unpack, but I make it simple with an acronym that I use, and don't be surprised, that acronym is ethics. The E is empathy, is that we have to feel where people are. We have to understand the people we're talking. This is what we've been talking about. To have a sense of the other person. Who are they? Where are they holding? What is their point of view? How is my message going to be received? Right? To feel what other people are feeling is the first step to connection. Then there's trust. That's the T. And we've already talked about how trust is the foundation. If I'm not trusted, my message is not going to be heard. And if I'm not willing to trust you, why should you trust me? So that's the second point. The H is humility. And that we've already touched on, is that I have to be willing to entertain the idea that there are things I don't know. And maybe there are things I could understand better. And as Pastor Rick Warren says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less and putting the focus on the other person. The I is inquisitiveness. So that's the curiosity that we've talked about. And I don't use the C for curiosity, because the C is courage, because it takes courage to be inquisitive. If I ask a question and I really am prepared to hear the answer, right? There are two ways to ask a question. I could say, what are you talking about? Well, that has a question mark on the end of it, but it's not really a question. It's really an attack. Whereas if I say, what was that you said? Now it means I'm really open to the answers. So having the courage to be open to the unknown. And then the S is self-discipline, because this is not a checklist. It's a process. And we never get to the end. If we get to the end, we go back to the beginning and start over again. And then when we live our lives this way, especially if we're in leadership positions, but even if we're not, if we're just part of a culture, people are going to recognize our integrity. They're going to recognize our character. They're going to admire us for our sincerity and our authenticity, of being genuine. And they're going to be drawn to us. They're going to want to be more like us. And that's how you change a culture. If I'm busy trying to change you, you're going to be pushing back. If I'm busy trying to change me, you're going to recognize that. And you're going to be inspired to want to ask more from yourself as well.
I love that. That's always so hard to come up with those acronyms, and you did a fabulous job. But I have to comment on the courage to be inquisitive, because I share this with my audiences frequently. I was a painfully shy individual, not just as a child, but throughout my formative years and throughout my education, throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and graduate school. I didn't have the courage to raise my hand and ask a question. And that memory will be with me forever, because I knew the question, but I didn't have that courage to raise my hand. And what's so interesting is that once I built that courage, once I was more confident, I'm always the first hand up at a event now because I learn so much more when I ask questions. So
Yeah,
yeah.
now I can relate because I've told this story myself, how I was pathologically shy when I was younger too. So we can have that conversation. But the sages teach that a shy person will never become wise for
Mhm.
exactly the reason you said. If I'm afraid to ask questions, I'm not putting myself in a situation where I can learn. And
Exactly.
that's the other C we haven't talked about. That's the clarity. Is that
Mhm.
after asking the questions, I have to keep at it. Sometimes I won't understand the answer the first time.
Exactly.
Sometimes the person may not be articulate, or I'm just not in a place where I'm ready to absorb that
Mhm.
information and integrate it into my understanding. So after the curiosity is the seek for clarity.
Mhm.
And then the courage really comes before and after. It's the courage to ask the question, but then it's the courage to put it into practice and to
Mhm.
actually use that clarity to change as you're describing you did. Because once you implement that change in yourself, you're now a different person. You're now
Completely.
positioned to
Mhm.
learn more, to understand more, and to give and serve better.
Mhm. Exactly. So you will notice, Yonason, if I am ever at an event that you are speaking at, I'll be in that front row and my hand will go up first.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of questions, I do want to just say that we do have one person who commented that they love your acronym, as I do. That was fabulous. And I do want to answer Esther's question. She asked, the ability to articulate ideas is always a challenge when thinking on a second language. Any insights? So, Esther, thank you so much. If you have followed me on YouTube, or LinkedIn, you know this is our expertise. We work with non-native English speakers around the globe. The first one thing I want to tell you, Esther, is you are not alone. I want you to really hear that you are not alone. This is a challenge that so many non-native English speakers deal with. Number one, the the whole beauty of being a good communicator is being able to think on your feet, not rush to answer. And I'm sure Yonason will agree. If so, especially in the ethical world, if we respond really quickly, what comes out may not be as clear and articulate as we want it to be. So having the confidence and the courage, let's use that word courage, to think, to have silence after someone's asked you a question, to think of your answer and pause before you deliver the response will help you tremendously to think on your feet. So that's one tip I can give you, Esther, right here live. And while we're wrapping up and summarizing, please feel free to ask any questions. Tori, thank you. Tori commented that this has been very inspiring. And Yonason, I agree. There has been such great insight into ethical communication, some great points, learning for all of us to really understand ethics and to better understand communication. And I already gave everyone a homework assignment. And when this streams on YouTube, I want you to comment on YouTube and tell me how that homework assignment went. So here it is in case you missed it earlier. When you are having a conversation this afternoon and someone is talking to you, maybe it's in a meeting, maybe it's networking, maybe it's a prospect, maybe it's a client, maybe it's a colleague. I want you to ask a follow-up question that you may not have asked had you not watched this. You may have just listened and then responded with whatever comment you wanted to make. But I want you to have a thoughtful follow-up question and then let us know what you experience in the conversation that follows. Yonason, do you have additional feedback on that? Do you have comment?
I'd like to go to Esther's question briefly, because I had a neighbor in Israel who he was visiting America. He was staying with people he didn't know very well. And they gave him dinner, and they said, "Would you like a second serving?" He said, "No, thank you. I'm fed up." To him, it made perfect sense.
Exactly.
So, what you just said, Jayne, is that knowing or having the confidence to say, "I don't know," or "Could you repeat that?" or "I need time to think about that." That's also part of integrity and ethics. We feel like we have to. It's like the radio or sometimes the podcasting culture. You can't have dead air. You can't pause to think. You can't talk too slowly. You can't say, "Well, let's sort of talk that out and see what happens." There's a reason why some of these long form discussions are becoming popular, because people want to see real discussions, not where everything is already canned and we're just repeating the same slogans and sound bites we've said 100 times. To be willing to say, "Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Let's try to understand that better." And it's very difficult. George Orwell says, if we don't speak clearly, we don't think clearly. And so, certainly for me, where I study in Hebrew, but I never became fluent in the language, in the spoken language, it's a challenge for me sometimes, because I have to translate everything, and then I have to recognize where the translations are inaccurate. So it's recognizing our own limitations and that willingness to be vulnerable, to admit that we don't have all the information we need, to struggle sometimes and tell people, I'm going to struggle with this a little bit, and maybe you can help me out. This is all part of communication and the ethics of communication.
Thank you. And again, I just love that last quote again. If we don't speak clearly, we don't think clearly. I love that. I want to thank you so much, Yonason, for being such a fantastic addition to my LinkedIn Live today. And while I have people here, I was just fumbling because I was looking for the date on January 17th, Monday, January 17th. I will have my next LinkedIn Live, and it's such a fabulous topic related. It's a great follow-up to this, because one of the bullets for today was recognize how labels sabotage our ability to communicate and connect. And I said to Yonason that is so meaningful to me, because 2022, I have a special gift for everyone on this topic. For those who have followed me, you know that every year for the past 5 years, we do a 1-minute video tip on all of social media, a 1-minute video tip, and it's always related to a theme. So we just closed out 2021 with 52 tips for virtual communication. And all 52 tips are available on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and now in a beautiful PDF on my website as well. So drum roll about what the topic is for 2022, and I will kick this off on January 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's how to communicate in the diverse community in the workplace. So it's diversity and communication in the workplace. And what a great kickoff is recognizing how labels can sabotage our ability to communicate. And I might have to kick off my LinkedIn on January 17th with that topic. So I want to thank you all. And Yonason, we had one more comment. I just want to let you know you are being thanked for making ethical communication simple. So I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank for the questions and the comments. And since it is the beginning of 2022, I want to wish everybody peace, safety, and good health for 2022. And thank you, Yonason, for joining me today.
Thank you, Jayne.